Okay, Adrianna Irvine, I've
Hello.
got you. I've got you. I'm so grateful that you've given your time so generously to this space. How are you?
Very happy to do so, Dave. We go back quite a ways. I remember meeting you in Dalesford, actually, in Notting Hill, to
Yeah,
discuss all sorts of things you were doing as you were embarking on going to Australia,
yeah.
um, and writing books and very involved in aspects of recovery. It was fascinating. So it was lovely to see you percolate up again.
Just popped up out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like that was a while ago. I mean, it was, but it's gone so quick, and everything that's happened in between. And I really want you to bring all your wisdom and all your insight and all your knowledge that you've accumulated over the time that you've been on this planet to this
A very
conversation.
long time. I'm not sure, I'm not sure we've got enough time for all of that, but yes.
Oh no, we got to do a little condensed version. We'll get it all in as best we can. So I guess to start off with, for anyone that's listening to this, anyone that finds this conversation, who are you, Adriana?
I am female, she, her. I am 73 and a half. I was born in England, but my entire family was Scottish, except for a maternal grandmother who was American. They're all gone now, sadly, by many years. A couple of cousins left who are delightful, who I speak to relatively regularly. A couple up in Scotland, couple in America. Um, yeah, I had lived in 22 houses by the time I was 16. My father was a doctor in the military. My parents met when they were five, and they were born in 1914. So they did both world wars, the Depression, and Second World War. They had just got married on the 1st of January, 1940, on the basis that they thought it would be a while, and mum had waited just 6 years for dad to qualify as a doctor. And they were together for 2 days, and he was gone for 5 years, which was very usual for those who lived through the Second World War. And when he got back, they decided we didn't have the National Health. Well, I wasn't around, but we didn't have the National Health Service. He decided to stay on in the military. Both of them had interesting, how shall we put it, family relationships, and decided they did not want to go back to Glasgow, which was quite severely affected in the Second World War. And when my mother had been throughout the whole war, they both wanted out. So he signed on, and they did all sorts of things. They went off to Austria, and eventually I was born in 1952, at which point they were both 38. So it's not surprising that they're gone almost 30 years
Mm,
now. And I was 6 months old when dad went off to Korea, and I was two when we joined him in Malaysia. And it was then the communist terrorist war, and he was running a kind of tented hospital. Um, and so, yes, I've lived in lots of different countries all over the world. And for a long time, I think until I got myself into recovery, which is 20, nearly 27 years ago now,
amazing.
because of the aspects of and the places and the what they used to euphemistically call the theaters of war that I grew up around, I always perceived that the problem and the enemy and the fear was on the outside.
Mm,
And it took until I hit a rock bottom and got into recovery to discover actually what was going on the outside was one thing, but what was going on down through the pike of historical relationships, generations, etc., there was far more trouble on the inside. And
yeah.
it took until recovery to really understand that. I went to 9 different schools, so I'm very used to being the newcomer I'm very good at being thrown into well, I think I'm very good. I might be proven wrong. I think I'm used to, let's put it that way. I'm used to being thrown in to very challenging circumstances and doing great.
Yeah.
But my latest piece of recovery, because recovery, thank God, never ends. It's an
Mm,
ongoing, forever, a day at a time. And I learned this when I was headhunted to go off and work in Florida a few years ago, that I needed to convert my profound levels of endurance into resilience because they're
mm,
very different. And that actually now in semi-old age, I don't need to endure things anymore. I don't need to endure, for whatever reason I might have, people that I don't want to hang out with. In fact,
mm.
at a meeting quite recently, I don't usually say fellowships, but it's safe to assume I'm in most of them.
Yeah.
It was a relative newcomer. I'm not sure what they made of my boundaries, but I don't think they were very happy with them because they are sort of dabbling with the music business and made a comment that, of course, I fell for. And I debunked it quite quickly. And of course, then they wanted a conversation about the music business, rock and roll in particular, because I
Mm.
was in that business for over 20 years, but I left it when I went into recovery. And when this person said, "Oh, can I have your phone number?" I mean, literally 5 minutes into the conversation, I said, "No, I'm sorry." And they went,
And you've only just met this person. Is this
"Only
like,
just met them, literally." And it was a man, and I said, "No, sorry."
mm,
And he said, "Oh, well, can I have your email then?" And I said, "No, no, I'm sorry." Um, and actually, they tried again this last week. He came over and said, "Oh, it was such a." Well, I did answer a few questions, but I did say I couldn't be helpful. And they came over again. It's very unusual, this in recovery, I find.
mm,
Listed all their mental health diagnoses. Um, and said, I found the conversation really useful. I'd like it to continue. And I took a deep breath. And this is not about them. And it's not about, sometimes, we have some quite unwell people,
hmm,
trying with.
yeah,
Had we been talking about recovery, I would have been much more available. But it
yes,
was much more about my background. And I'm quite closely guarded about that, as you and I have talked
yes,
often.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and I said, I'm actually going to say a hard no there because this is my home group. My friends are here. I barely know you. I think this is about the information that you want for me about a business that I left 27 years ago that I actually don't find that easy to talk about. And I've got friends here. I want to hang out with my friends in fellowship. That's
Mm,
why we're here. We're not here doing a symposium on the music business. If we were, it might be a bit different.
yeah,
And do you know, Dave, I would have been incapable of saying that certainly 27 years ago.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
probably up until I wouldn't have been so clean in how I said it up until about 10 years ago.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
at this point, I'm sorry if he took it all the wrong way. I'm really sorry for that. But I'm not attached to it. And
yeah,
that is freedom from the bondage of self.
yeah,
I don't have
100%.
to prove what I know. I know
Yeah,
what I know. And I might not even be right. It might have all changed. I might even have been giving him useless information for all we know.
yeah, yeah,
The idea that I could hold myself and stay true to myself and choose what I would like to do with my time, which at the age of 73, I haven't got a whole heap left. I mean, I've got a lot, but
I
not as much
reckon,
as I'd
I
like.
don't know, I reckon you've got quite a bit left in the tank.
No, there's a lot in the tank, but there isn't a lot in the body. I'll tell you that much. Body is failing.
You're
And that's
doing all right. You're doing all right. You're doing all
that
right.
that's the great plus of getting old, actually. And it's not to say that I might not have learned those boundaries if I wasn't in recovery, but I'm going to make the point that if I wasn't in recovery, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Real
100%.
simple.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's amazing I always I don't think there's a day that goes by where I don't take a moment to land in that knowledge, you know. and gratitude that I'm blessed.
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
blessed, very blessed, you know.
My time for the serenity prayer every day, it probably too much information, is always in the shower. It's because I turn the hot to freezing cold, and it's the long version of the serenity prayer beating down on my head, and the gratitude and the warmth that then ensues. So it's the connection of mind, body, and spirit, which I'm
Yeah.
vaguely fanatical about.
So you start the day with a cold shower, is that what you just so it's
I have a warm shower
and
and then
then
I turn it to cold.
wow,
But
okay.
I did wild water swimming last weekend.
Mm,
I was doing a wonderful workshop training um, with, I wonder if I should say her name. I will, with Sarah Bridge, who has now taken on the mantle with her own adaptations too of Pia Melody.
yeah.
And it was a training. It's the third time I've done it. And of course, they've all been completely different
Mm.
in terms of inner child and giving back various feelings and etc etc. And we went cold water swimming, wild water swimming, when we were up there. We were up at the Falcon at Castle Ashby, which is a friend of mine's hotel and retreat and so on, and it was spectacular. I swam like 4 strokes and got out.
Wow.
And I was
Was it
hmm?
was it cold? Was it cold? Like really
It
cold?
was 7 degrees. It wasn't that cold. And then my partner and I went away on Thursday to Estelle Manor, which is fantastic out in Oxfordshire. And we had got the winter package, which included 3 hours in there. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. I say Eynsham. I think they say Ancient baths.
I'm not
And
sure.
it's steams and saunas and a huge heated pool, but then there was a plunge in the cold, and I didn't, my feet didn't touch the bottom, and I didn't hang about in it, but that was 3 degrees. That
Oh,
was cold.
it's the getting out as
So
well.
good
And
for you.
yeah, it's the
So the
getting out.
getting out, you're infused with all the endorphins and the
Mm,
serotonin and all the good stuff, which is
yeah.
really the only way I chase it these days.
Yeah. So do you feel that that's a big part? Because I feel like I relate, you know, there's a huge part of my own journey now of growth, you know, of personal development, which is focused on more somatic, you know. I feel like I have to keep the upkeep of my mindset, and that's a given. But you know, I just do a lot of I'm more body conscious with, you know, I do breath work and stuff like that, you know. So
I
do you
don't,
feel?
I don't, I think it has a huge part. I'm not
Mm,
as involved in it as I would perhaps like to be. Um, it's interesting that you use the word somatic, because when I first left the music business in 98 and went back to school to become a psychotherapist,
mm,
my placement at that point was in a big prison in London, a men's prison. And I did not know, well, I don't think I knew anything about transference and countertransference, and still, I mean, I'd heard the words, but I didn't really understand them.
mm.
And I ended up doing my thesis for my master's in integrative psychotherapy on murderers' weapons, a psychoanalytic look at the symbolic reenactment of childhood trauma. And I came up with that because I don't know that I still have it as much, but then I relied on what people far cleverer than I will ever be called my somatic countertransference. So I started on my theory of I don't know why people kill people.
Mm,
And again, this is not backed by any science other than my own experience and my own research. Although I think quite a few, I'm not in forensics anymore, and I think quite a few forensics would do a far better job of explaining it than I would. But you've got me, so here I am. I was working with a prisoner, and I knew ahead of time that he had killed his girlfriend and that he had strangled her. And I remember thinking, as I was given a cell on the wing that was obviously not occupied by a prisoner. And I went in one day a week, and I actually stayed for just over 5 years. I loved the work. Absolutely, what a
mm.
privilege. And he came in, and I remember thinking, oh, we're going to have to survive this. I didn't know what the thought meant, but I always observe my sort of stray thoughts. I wouldn't be as arrogant as to say I think they come from a higher power, but they certainly come from a part of myself that I trust. It doesn't
Yeah,
speak often, but when it does, I pay attention.
yeah.
And he sat down, and for the first several weeks that I saw him on a Thursday at 10 a.m., I would come out of the session with fingernail marks in the palm of my hands from trying not to pass out. And I couldn't understand what was going on, but it was really sort of my head would start to swirl. I'd start to feel dizzy. So I moved his session. It was so bizarre, but I moved it from 10 to 11 o'clock to see if it was because it was 10 o'clock in the morning, as we're talking about body and embodiment. It wasn't. It was specifically with him. And after about 6 or 7 weeks of this, I started to observe him much more strongly. Quite daunting to be at that point the only, well, I wasn't the only female because there were one or two female prison officers, but you're very aware that you're the only female working with a lot of
Mm.
male murderers. I'm on the lifers wing. I'd asked for long-term clients without quite taking in what the impact of that would be. But what a fascinating, extraordinary group of human beings. And I realized that he came in as if he were holding his breath and that I was mimicking it without understanding that that's what I was doing, like a kind of a, and then he would sit for quite a few minutes. And then the first words I would wait until I mean, I'd say good morning, but I would wait until he spoke. And he would then expel a sort of a chunk of what he wanted to bring to therapy, at which point then I would start to breathe. And I realized that I was holding my breath and mimicking him to the point where I'm not very good at holding my breath, clearly, compared to him. When I
Mm.
brought it into the session and said, I'm observing that you arrive and it's as if you're not breathing. And I won't go into the ins and outs of it, but it transpired. It brought up a memory of his that I don't think he'd thought about for years. He was in his early 40s. He's dead now, sadly. But when he was 4, his mother would do something, and it necessitated, when she told him to be quiet, where he learned to hold his breath. I mean, he could have been a free diver. He could hold his breath
Mm.
for many, many, many minutes. And I
Wow.
don't think he realized that. And it was so interesting because I mean, that's the forensic part of me. I know there's all sorts of attendant emotions that go with it, but he had murdered his girlfriend in the kitchen, and you would have thought a knife would be the obvious.
Mm.
He'd found a cord and he'd used it to strangle her, which again had an implication of breath and breathing.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
transpired he'd been born with the umbilical cord round his neck, and
Ah.
ultimately, quite a few years after we'd finished, he took his own life by hanging himself. I learned from a colleague at the prison. He'd been moved on to another prison. And these kind of symbolism, the symbolic
Mm.
reenactments of their childhood trauma was very resonant
Yeah.
for me. I couldn't actually do the work now because I think I spent probably aspects of the first 50 years of my life somewhat dissociated. Um, I have shed loads of trauma, big T, small t, all the usual stuff that most of us in recovery have.
Yeah.
And if I say, and this is without a word of a lie, 1985, I was living in New York and I got on an Eastern Airlines flight in January to fly to Fort Lauderdale from New York to do a rock video because that's what I was doing then. And the plane was hijacked and it was a Cuban trying to go home. Now, clearly, we all survived because I'm here. I did not experience that as trauma. I was riveted. I have a lapsed pilot's license from a very long time ago. So I was really interested in all the protocols that take place. And I discovered that the bulkheads that divide the cabins open up. And I don't know if they still do, but there's phones there. And I kind of, the purser and I kind of bonded as we helped move people forward because the whole thing, shortly after we'd left New York, we hadn't even got to cruising altitude, this guy, it was not the deadly stealth of a hijacker in a cockpit with a gun. He was at the back of the plane. He took the cork out of a bottle, and I guess it was a rum or a wine bottle, and he'd filled it with petrol. And he kind of sprayed it over the back and stood there with a Bic lighter. So that definitely got our attention.
Yeah.
And
God.
and I regret to say, where I hadn't had much respect for what we horribly used to call the trolley dollies, the air stewardesses.
Mm.
These were young, mostly Puerto Rican women. They were phenomenal. I mean, it was so empowering to see how they could spring into. I mean, when I looked round, because the guy was shouting, "No movie!" He'd ripped the movie out of the projector. It's that long ago. We didn't have DVDs or CDs or anything. And I told him to be quiet because I was right at the back of the plane, a smoker in those days. Needless to say, we did not light a cigarette. Thankfully, the light to say you could smoke hadn't gone out. Um, or rather the light to say you couldn't smoke hadn't gone out, because we wouldn't be here. Anyway, all that to say, we did eventually do an emergency landing into Orlando, although we didn't know that. And the whole thing took over 3 hours. I was not traumatized by
My
that. I got
God.
on a plane that afternoon. I mean, extraordinary. Absolute. Well, it was a nighttime flight. By the time we arrived in Fort Lauderdale, from having come down from Orlando, it was the next day. But I got on a plane that afternoon.
Can I ask you, just to jump in there, Adriana, do you think there's, because I kind of relate to that. I don't know if I've got this wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong. It's like it's almost like most people would have the aversion to danger. You know, I had a, it's almost like I would be drawn towards it. It was like, I still weirdly, obviously I've got a lot more discernment now, and like you, boundaries, but I still have that kind of, there's something in me. I don't know if I'll always have it where it just, if there's something edgy going on, I've got a little bit of a, something happens. It's like a
Well,
little,
I think it's partly how you and I get on. I think in recovery we learn that the dangerous stuff and the stuff that we're drawn to is not necessarily the best stuff for us.
yeah.
People, places, or things.
Mm-hmm.
But I think partly because I grew up in I mean, we lived under house arrest for 14 months in West
Mm,
Africa, which at the time I would have said I retain no memories of fear. My parents were amazing, but I've since done some somatic workshops on it. And of course, I uncovered some of the fear and some of the memories that I'd long since locked off. And
mm,
it was a scary time. We escaped in the clothes we stood up in, literally. And I mean, I was 9. That was just before Christmas. We arrived back. It was freezing cold. We didn't have warm clothes because it was West Africa. And by the 3rd of January, I was in boarding school on the west coast of Scotland. I didn't see anybody I knew for 4 months. You'd have to dissociate from that because it's just too difficult.
yeah.
What I find now is I think towards the end of all my addictions, both the acting out, the acting in, substances, etc., relationships, codependence, depression, all of that, the whole mishigas, as they say, um, I was beginning to understand. I mean, the consequences were bigger and closer, if you see what I mean. And I
Hmm.
could understand that I did 3 jobs in New York. I went for 3 months and stayed for 5 years. I did 3 jobs and they all fell, I mean, spectacularly apart. One of them owing me a ton of money. The last one meaning I had to withdraw my green card application. I had to walk away from an apartment that I'd just spent $5,000 getting into. And even I could work out these three, they were male employers. They hadn't sat somewhere plotting my downfall. Actually, I was the common denominator. And one of the great things that recovery teaches me is that, one finger pointing out, three pointing back at me. I just simply was so gung ho to go do stuff that was really, fantastic.
Yeah.
I just didn't do my due diligence. Is there a contract? Will you definitely pay me? Will you agree? I mean, the last one, the contract was written on a cocktail napkin. Well, the guy just ripped it up and said, "So sue me." Well, I couldn't,
Mm,
so
yeah.
I'm much more risk averse in a mature way. But
Yeah.
that's not to say that dodgy folk don't interest me.
The way you put that, dodgy folk.
I mean, when I started in the prison, I had done some work with Guns N' Roses and the Stones, and I thought, oh my God, these lifers have more tattoos
That's
than
so,
any of the crews with those guys.
it's such a mad. This is what fascinates me about you and your life is that's just that what you just said there in one sentence. It's just that shouldn't fit that what you just said. It's such a juxtaposition. Like, you're
But it also isn't, because I was a lot older than most of my colleagues when I got in to do my master's. And in fact, I don't have a primary degree. I'm still stunned that I was let in to do it. I had a few certificates, and I had been a Samaritan for many years, which was much more a comment on my social life, I think. I
Mm.
seemed to be available every other Saturday night. But anyway, yes, by the by. Um, and I saw we were handed, I don't think they do it anymore, but we were handed this alphabetized list of placements. And
Mm.
of course, Clever Clogs here sees them all starting with A and B, and I go to the end of the alphabet. I'm not going to say the prison, but it starts with a
Yeah.
letter at the very end of the alphabet. So I wrote to them and I went in and was interviewed. I hadn't got a clue what I was saying or doing. And I said, I need long-term clients, as I said earlier. So there I am on the lifers wing. And at the point
Totally.
where I'd got the clearance and I showed up to start the placement, the guy at the gate who's handing me a laminate, his was orange, mine was green, or some variation of colors, but they were different. And I said to him, "What's the difference between them?" And he said, "Oh, yours is access all areas." And I thought, "Oh, that rings a bell." and, and so it was the collision of all my worlds together. It
Yeah.
was rock and roll because these were the baddest of the bad boys, as it were.
Yeah.
And I'm
Yeah.
not making light of their crimes by any stretch of the imagination, because there is no likeness to be made of what they had done. And they wouldn't attempt to do that either.
Yeah.
The laminate always made me laugh. I grew up with my father in the military, so I was surrounded by uniforms. I mean, it really was the meeting of both sides of
Yeah.
my life. And I think, to be honest, it was such extraordinary work that it really did reach parts of me that nothing else at that point could reach. And I was studying hard and I was in early recovery. I was in my first 5 years, 6 years of recovery. I had a year, July 97, after 10 years of being very ill. My father, not mentally, but physically, my father died. In that December, I had a huge operation. It was my mum's obvious last Christmas at that point, and I had power of attorney for them and was running their care, actually from the age of 35 to 45. I put myself in treatment in the February. I realized I couldn't continue in the rock and roll world if I was really going to get well. Um, I went for codependence and depression, but ticked a lot of boxes when I got there. Um, Came back, went back to school, bought a house, and my mum died in the October. So you won't be surprised to hear I sat still for 10 years. Lucky that I could even buy a house, but I could. And I had lodgers and I got myself a dog and I very regularly went to meetings. I had a lot of supervision. Um, it was it was really an embodying time. It was both putting myself to sleep in some ways and waking myself up.
Mm.
I'd come back from a day at the prison and I would think, oh, I'll just put my feet up for 5 minutes. And I would literally pass out for a couple of hours. It was quite extraordinary. I did also work at a women's prison, which is no longer open here in London, but that was a very different experience. Um,
That's interesting. So it's because to come from the world of, I don't know if glamorous is the right term, but coming from what most people, excuse me, would deem, the world of entertainment, rock and roll, all of the trappings and frills and bows and whistles of the rock and roll entertainment world, to come out of that and into a new path which you had chosen. I guess you've got to have some kind of I don't know if stimulation is the right word for it, but to come from that world into something that's just not stimulating for your mind and your spirit, I guess would be quite a challenge, no?
did you say not stimulating for mind and spirit?
Yeah, if it wasn't, if you was to come out of that
Oh, no,
world,
the work I'm doing is far more stimulating.
yeah.
It stimulated. No, that's actually not true. I'm going to bust myself. It is phenomenally stimulating, but very differently.
Mm.
In the rock and roll world, I mean, I worked on some extraordinary things. I organized all the travel and the rehearsals and the ground transportation and the hotels for the artists on the Freddie Mercury tribute, for example. And it's one of the best shows I've ever worked on, much as it was for a very sad reason.
Yeah.
Spectacular. Now, the work was really hard, and the remaining members of Queen did an extraordinary job. And Jerry Stickles, who was the production director, who was one of my mentors, who'd started as Jimi Hendrix's tour manager. Sadly, he's no longer here, although Sylvia, his widow, is. He's the one who hired me, and it's the first time I worked on anything, both in rock and roll and otherwise, where when I said to him after it was over, I said, that was the most uncomplicated, long hours and amazing, but that was the most uncomplicated job I've ever done. How come? And he said, well, I don't overemploy. And it took me like 2 days to figure out what he meant, because
Mm,
he understood how a pyramid scheme works. He was the head guy for production. He
mm,
would have two or three people he'd speak to, who would have two or three people that they spoke to. But if I was out at the airport meeting, well, at that point there was um, Axl Rose came in on a different flight, shall we say, to everyone
mhm,
else, um, and I could call Jerry's mobile and he would answer it. I'd never had that experience in rock and roll, so there
mm,
were areas of rock and roll that I finally worked my way into that were fantastically well organized. Very, very, very long hours. I mean, I did a Paul McCartney world tour, and I don't think I even had a week off in a year, but I didn't notice it
mm,
because it was so much fun. I mean, it's not that glamorous behind the scenes, trust me. I've worked in more
mm.
loos in stadiums around the world than I've ever actually visited for the usual reason you would go to a loo, and certainly spent more time in them, and not many of them smell that great.
Oh
Um, but
dear.
especially not in Argentina and Chile. But there you go. But it was fantastic. But it was also an addiction because
Mm,
my identity was very tied up with what I did and who I did it for. But it wasn't me, it wasn't
yeah,
my identity.
yeah.
And now, it was a hard. I mean, recently, I will share this and I will name drop. In 1995, 5, so 30 years ago, I had the great joy of doing all the additional clearances on the Beatles anthology
Mm,
um, for Apple, which then was the Beatles company and still is, unlike Apple computers.
yeah, yeah.
And quite recently, Apple got in touch with all of us who worked on it 30 years ago because Disney have bought it. They've recalibrated and re-edited. I've only seen two of the episodes.
I've just watched them all. Yeah, I've
Have
just watched.
you?
Yeah,
Have you?
yeah. I love it.
And
Yeah.
I was gobsmacked. Where's the crew of us that worked there 30 years ago? We're still credited. I mean, yes, we did the work then, but you don't expect to be remembered 30 years later.
Wow.
And we were invited in to see episode one, which they have re-edited. Giles Martin, who's the son of George Martin, who was the original producer, has done all the music, and he's every bit as good,
Mm,
possibly sometimes even better, although he would refute that, than his father. I mean, we watched episode one, we watched episode nine, because as a result of doing it 30 years ago, George was still alive then. Paul, Ringo, and George got together to put together some singles of music that John had been working on. John, sadly, already long gone. And
mm,
just recently, I think it's 40 plus years since he was murdered. And they all kind of got together and it reunited them in a way that they did work in each other's studios. And that is episode nine. And it was one of the most, I don't always look back. I look back at isolated things I did in the music business and pinch myself and think, wow, I can't believe I was there. But this was a real homage to all of us that really did the work from the people that we were doing the work for, which
yeah,
is not that usual in the music business or the film
yeah,
business or in it actually any business.
yeah.
It was really touching, and the Beatles were the soundtrack to my life. I mean, I went and saw them. My dad was fighting in the war in Cyprus in 1964 when I moved schools from Scotland to England. And as a compensation, because he'd been away for so long, he bought tickets for us to go and see the Beatles in the Odeon in Bournemouth. I was 12. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven.
Oh
And you
my
don't meet
God.
many of us who actually saw them play live.
You're lucky.
I
Oh my
know, I know.
God.
It was just extraordinary. So,
Yeah.
so I now again, I feel much more holistic and I do some work still in the music business. Um,
I was going to ask you how the two worlds collide, because you've just, anyone listening, you've just taken us through the expansiveness of the depth of what you've given to that world. Um, and then crossing over into, this other realm which you find yourself in now. But the two worlds collide, like, I'm from when I was doing hairstyling, I used to tap into, not on the scale that you did, but I was tapping into that kind of world as well. But coming out of it and doing what I do now, I also, like you, have found myself sort of colliding. It's like a hybrid. Sometimes the two worlds meet and cross over.
well, I think I have a great, very, very, very sardonic girlfriend in LA, American clothes designer, Karen, and she says there are 97 people in the world, including Asia, and all the rest are cardboard cutouts, which always makes me laugh. So if we go on her funny theory, I mean, it's not really a theory. I think like attracts like,
Yeah.
as we hope light in the light of recent events attract
Hmm.
Hanukkah and so on attracts light. Um, and I think that we find each other. I think we're tribal. I think we're clannish. I think we find, I never felt I belonged fully until I got into recovery.
Yeah.
And now I know they're my tribe. Not every fellowship, but most of them, and most of the
Hmm.
people that I've known for years. Um, and I think well, when COVID struck, I observed that the touring part of work, which was the last bit that I did well, I did a bit in the 70s and a tiny bit in the 80s. And then in the 90s was the big world tours, and I did a few of them. Um, I watched all the touring personnel, their work fell off a cliff. I mean, it was wiped out in a heart.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because they were all freelance, what were they going to do? And a wonderful woman called Susie Green, who's now trained actually as a psychotherapist, she's also a nutritionist, but she's also a tour manager. She set up a Zoom thing called the Back Lounge. And I can't even remember how she and I met, but we met through friends of friends of friends through, oh, I know, through music support.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the great music charities that Robbie Williams is a patron of, and actually an old boss of mine when I worked at Island Records, Tim Clark,
Mm.
he was retired now, but was one of Robbie's managers. Um, and Susie was doing a Zoom group every Wednesday evening to as a means of support, not a mental health thing, but it kind of morphed into that. It was phenomenal.
Hmm.
And as a result of doing that, I would guest on it a couple of times, and then it would be my joy if I wasn't working to attend it too. And I met a couple of tour managers from who are married to each other. They're back in, well, she's Australian, he isn't, but they're back living in Australia now. Um, and they invited me. I thought it was incredibly forward-sighted. They invited me onto one of the big tours that they were tour managing. It's not Taylor Swift, I hasten to add, but it was almost as big as in its time. It's a few years ago now. And I went out to Wembley, and it was my idea of absolute heaven. I think a couple of times they did find me an office, but you don't often find that backstage. And on some of the European dates, I only went for a couple of days because I have no wish to go back on the road, thank you. They'd put me in a corner of catering, and Amanda, is the name of the tour manager, she would put up a list, and those that wanted to come and talk to somebody, which of course people are much more open to doing now
Yeah.
than they were 40 years ago, 50 years
Yeah.
ago. And they'd sign up, and I would see them for an hour each, and off they'd go. And we had a sort of a little arrangement that if she had a concern, she might invite them to come along and see me. And I would say to them, it's totally confidential. I will not be relaying to anyone anything that you've told me. However, if we think that maybe you're not tour ready and you need to leave, we will discuss that, and
Mm.
then you will go back to them and give the conclusion. In only one event, and I probably saw 30 people altogether, had this person sadly relapsed, but they knew that they had, and I obviously, because I specialize in addictions, knew that they had, and I went with them.
Mm.
for him to confess. And he got back on the horse, as it were,
Yeah.
back on the tour, and then he relapsed again.
Yeah.
And God bless him, he called me when he got back, and I was able to refer him pretty quickly to a good psychiatrist. And he started going to meetings, and it kind of worked out.
Yeah.
And then I was in the running to do another couple of tours, and that they didn't happen. And it's I'm also, I should say, David, one of the for any of your listeners hoping to grow old, um, one of the great things is I'm thrilled when things happen, and I'm thrilled when they don't.
Yeah.
So the net result is I'm thrilled most of the time because they either will or they won't. And
Yeah.
I'm good. If someone invites me out, how lovely. If it cancels, how lovely.
Yeah.
It's just really, I'm just at a stage in my life. It's all, not all, unicorns and rainbows, but it's pretty much that way. And I know how, if I'm having a bit of a duff moment in my head, I know how to take a look and go, well, what's really going on here?
Yeah.
Of course, I'm in therapy myself. I've had a shed load of therapy, and I obviously have supervision. I say one of the things actually that was quite interesting when I was in the music business, I was very aware of not wanting to name drop who I was working with because I'm of an age and stage where you'll have heard of all the people that I
Yeah.
work with. And some are not quite so well known today. Like I did a long form video for Dire Straits. That's one of the most fantastic 8 weeks of my life. It was brilliant. In Rotterdam and Nîmes in France. I mean, it was just fantastic. Couldn't believe I was being paid to do this. Um, but I was hesitant to name drop. And people always say, what do you do? Who what who you... Now, of course, I do a job where I cannot tell you who I work with. That's a great relief.
Yeah.
I've heard of most of them, but having gone into the therapy world, and interestingly, the Meadows in Arizona is the rehab that I put myself in '98. And in 2010 or 11, they asked me if I would do a talk for them. So interesting how recovery works, how a spiritual program works. Because I immediately said yes. I'm terrified because I'm going to be talking to my peers and, psychiatrists that I work with and so on. And I worked really hard on what I was going to say. And quite a few friends of mine said, "You're crazy to be doing this for free." I do work on the premise that the best things in life actually are free or priced.
100%. Yeah, I agree.
So I did the talk, and every job that I have had as a result of that talk came as a result of that talk, which
Yeah.
is astounding. So talk about, it being returned to you. I was
Yeah.
headhunted to work in a daycare in London, which I did a couple of days a week for a couple of years. And then I was headhunted to go and work in Florida in a very high-end rehab. And I did go. It took a year, of course, to get the work permit. It the first year and a half, it's probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, not for any discernible reason. But I look like I could do corporate, and I can't. I'm so rock and roll, it's not even funny. Um, I mean, in my soul, I'm rock and roll. The show
Yeah, of
must go
course.
on, and I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
expect you to go. It's 5 o'clock. I'm going home. It's like what? 5 p.m. shocked me in the therapy world. 5 a.m. I'd have been shocked in the music world. But
Oh,
anyway, um, but I had to stick with it. And of course, I look back now and it's actually one of the best things I ever did.
yeah.
One, it showed me, I became fully embodied. I never lost going to meetings, although I didn't go where I was living because I didn't want to bump into any
Yeah.
clients. Um, it was just extraordinary. And when I came back in 2018, um, yeah, I retain lots of American clients. I'm extremely well paid. I do work hard. I work 3.5 days a week because that's all I can give to the work. But I will work 8, 9 hours on those
Yeah.
days. Um, and hence we're talking on a Monday because I don't do sessions on a Monday. I could not be more grateful. I really could
Yeah.
not. And in my world, humility and gratitude live in the same universe, and you cannot have one without the other.
Yeah, I
And
agree. I
I
agree.
I am so profoundly grateful. And the clients that I have are the ones of very high net worth. And when they would show up in rehab, bless them, they'd be in such shame spirals. They'd be listing all the stuff
Hmm.
that they have. And I used to say to them, you might feel better listing all your stuff, but you're not here
Mm,
because of what you've got. You're
yeah,
here because of what you don't have, and what you don't have is priceless, or you would have
yeah,
wanted.
yeah. Can I ask you, right? So, out of all of your um, deep well of lived experience and everything you've been talking about, there's so much there, and we're only scratching the surface. We really, we really are. But there's so much in what you're saying. But I just want to ask you, out of all of the sort of such broad experience you have, what do you feel really works for you in, because most of the people that are going to hear this, they're on a path, or they're seeking a path. They're in what the world we're in. They're going to be looking for some sort of solution, if that's the right word to use. What's the things that stand out to you that really have worked for you throughout? You just mentioned humility. You just mentioned gratitude.
Mm.
But I mean, they're obviously up
I
there.
love the question, Dave. I really do. I think this is possibly not even going to make sense. I think I'm not sure the answers are nearly as important as people think.
Mm,
I think the questions are really important.
mm,
So if you think you're on a path, ask yourself, is it the path I want to be on? Where do I think I'm going on it? I would certainly advocate in living it a day at a time, but with an eye to where you're headed. And then that counterintuitive thing of hand it over. In my world, whatever path I'm on, it's already there and I'm on it. So what I think of it and how I try and manage it is kind of me getting in my own way.
yeah.
When I get in my car, and drive, obviously I have to be a super responsible driver. And you're looking at somebody who in 1990 got busted for drunken driving and lost their license for a year. So, not sensible then, super sensible now. Um, but I'm not in charge of traffic. I nearly go bonkers at how badly phased all the traffic lights are in London, because they're not like that in America.
A nightmare.
And the roadworks, oh, don't even get me started on the roadworks.
Oh no.
Um, I'm not in charge of any of that, but I know if I'm trying to get from A to B, two things will occur because of the roadworks and the traffic lights. Man alive, I have to be flexible.
Mm.
I have to check my road rage. I always laugh and say that my sat nav is the husband I never had. I will argue with her, but I'm not good. I'm not turning left there. I've got a better route.
What are you talking about? It's like,
And actually, I was at lunch with a recovery friend yesterday who said, "Oh, yes, I can testify to that because I often give her a lift." So I think the adage of take your life seriously
mm,
and all that that entails, but do not take yourself seriously.
yeah,
Lighten up.
yeah,
I collect quotes because I love the ability to say in a very, very few words, like we talked about.
yeah,
Quote from Marilyn Monroe, I'm always running into
yeah.
the unconscious.
I love that. Yeah.
The one about worrying, trouble borrowed from the future does not deplete the supply.
Hmm.
If it's the last dance, dance backwards. Which I love. I would be a bit feminist. How do you know that Ginger Rogers was a woman? Because she did everything that Fred Astaire did, only she did it backwards in high heels. Um,
Yes.
just that thing of not taking ourselves too seriously, but taking our lives seriously. What we do and the effect that we have, how our thoughts and feelings affect us.
Yeah.
But our thoughts and feelings in the frontal cortex are only the desktop, the
Yeah.
hard drive of our mind, which is 90% of it, is where it's the Jodrell bank of us. It's where our memories, it's the library of
Yeah.
us. And never be shy of asking for help, which is not something that came easily to me because, one of the programs which I will name that I have done is ACA, Adult Children of Dysfunctional Families.
Mm.
Um, I grew up needless and wantless, terrified, very controlling, very much in denial, super
Mm.
addicted to fantasy of, oh, well, it doesn't matter. And I go off in my head,
Mm.
of course, produces all sorts of brain chemicals. Now I know that reality is actually the thing that I need to stay in touch with.
Yeah.
I do have a mental health diagnosis, which I don't reveal. I lived on a lot of medication for quite a while. I do not see being on meds as a failure and not being on them as a success. I
Yeah.
hand that professional part to the professionals that know more than I do. But the fact is, nonetheless, that I am not on meds anymore and haven't been for quite a long time. But if I need to go back on them, I will.
Yeah.
Um, so I think and the reason I say all of that is because I learned when I was on the meds and I hated them actually, but there you go, put on a ton of
Mm.
weight. But they taught me that I know how to be in what I call the bus stop. And have no control over the times of the buses, but I know how to live in the bus stop and I never go too far from the bus stop. And the bus stop for me is reality. It's the
Mm.
shelter, it's my higher power, it's the power of the group. It's, when my mum died in October 98, I was in my first term of my master's. And it's too long a story, but she died the most awful death. And the hospital threw me into a coroner's inquest, which is no fun. The hospital, I might add, then lost her body, which is, I mean, it was horrendous. And when Christmas came, I got Christmas cards to both her and I. And I was stunned. I thought, what's wrong with everybody? And I thought, I was in such a state of profound shock that I'd forgot to tell people. Now,
Mm.
fortunately, she wouldn't have cared. As long as I was there at her funeral, she wouldn't have cared. But
Yeah.
I also went and did the MTV Awards in Milan 3 weeks after she died because I didn't know you didn't have to.
Oh God.
Fortunately, I was very clean and sober and in recovery. And actually, it was interestingly, I look back now, and it was one of the best shows that we worked on. We had a ton of fabulous artists at it. But it's I fear I'm very close to a godson of mine who's in his early 20s, who I adore. I don't have kids myself for a whole variety of reasons. It's a whole other podcast. But partly cognitively a choice too. Um,
I think we share something in common there because I don't have any kids, and I'm not sure I ever will have. So maybe there is an episode in that.
well, maybe there is
Maybe
because
there is. I don't know.
over that time when I might have the great love of my life then, who's also died, was a Rastafarian musician, and I worked out that if I had a child, I'd probably be doing it on my own. I'd compete with them for his attention, and I'd compete with him for their attention, and I would lose because he was the rock star. And I'm not going to name him, but the music was astounding, and sadly, he was the singer. He's now passed on, um, along with actually a couple of other members of his band because we're all so old now. Um, but it's yeah, I think having children is probably one of the most complicated things on the face of this earth. It's also why I don't work with children. I don't work with anybody below the age of 25 because I would want to go out and sort the parents out. I really would. And I will often say to parents of addicts, who I obviously work with a lot, because I'm only on Zoom, I don't work with active addiction very much
Yeah.
because I don't think that's appropriate.
Yeah.
But happy to help people get to a rehab and get to a good psychiatrist and all that. But when I work with families, I will always say to the parents, here's the good news. The good news is this is not your fault. The bad news is you are seriously implicated in what's going on and you need
Yeah.
to do your own work. Um, so yeah, I don't know where that leaves us in terms of our conversation. But I do think I love the question. I do think the younger generation know far more than my generation did at their age. I think they are far more savvy about all kinds of things. But I also think the pendulum has swung quite far. And I get quite nervous, not with the ones I know, but what I read and what I see on TV. There's real victimology, and I don't like that.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
always defer to the wonderful transactional analyst, Stephen Karpman, Karpman, who came up with the most fantastically simple idea of the drama triangle or the victim triangle, which
Yeah.
by definition has three places, the perpetrator, the victim, and the rescuer.
I know
I
it
lived
well.
in it. I
Yes.
lived in it 4 years. And actually, when my mom, she didn't do a great job of it, but she let me over here when I was in my early 40s, before I went into recovery, that she thought I was a victim. And I was horrified and shocked. But actually, she didn't do it well, but it was the truth.
Yeah.
And we always know when it's a truth we're not quite ready to hear. We have huge resistance to it.
Yep.
And I was saying with a client the other day who's very enmeshed with their mother. Um, and I said, well, you're constantly in the drama triangle. How am I that? Well, when your mother rings, you say, well, have you tried? That's you going in as rescuer. Well,
Yeah.
what should I say? I said, just say, oh, I hear you. That must be really difficult.
Yeah.
But that won't get anywhere. Well, you're still trying to rescue. Where are you trying to get? Whose path are you trying to control? And this is someone who's been with me for years. This is not quick work. It's
Yeah.
quicker than it used to be,
Yeah.
for a whole variety of reasons. Trauma treatment, a lot of my lot, us psychotherapists, say we're trauma informed, and we're not. I consider myself more informed than a few, but that does not make me a trauma expert.
Mm.
I'm not schooled in EMDR or somatic experiencing,
Yeah.
or any of the other plethora of trauma treatments.
There's a
Uh,
lot out there. Yeah.
a lot out there. There's a lot out there. Um, and I guess on a more upbeat note, I feel as if I've done everything in my life ass backwards. I got into recovery at 45. I went back to school at 45. Full recovery. I was in Al-Anon for a few years, but full on recovery, naming my addictions as opposed to looking at everyone else's.
Can I ask you, just jump in, because I remember you said about when you went back to do the talk at the place that you put
Yeah.
yourself
No,
in.
I didn't go back there. I did it in London, but it
Oh,
was
okay.
the
But you
Meadows.
did it.
Meadows is in Arizona. Yes.
Okay, yeah. But you actually put yourself in Arizona at the
Yeah.
time when you decided. And I wanted to land on that, but I'm just wanting to land on it really quickly. Um, why?
Ah,
Why did you make that decision?
I don't think we in England have a very good handle on how complex and
Mm,
yet how simple addiction is. I
yeah,
don't think we have a handle on it.
yeah,
Do I think we're trying? Yes.
yeah,
Do I feel that we in the UK ever lift the phone to the people who are really good at things in other countries and say, how did you do that? No, we don't.
yeah.
We muddle through. I have a hilarious example. When we first did call waiting with BT, it was a nightmare. I don't, you're probably too young to remember it.
I don't know
We didn't
about
ring the Americans and say, you invented call waiting. How do you do this? It was, the caller is on the line. The caller is on the line. The caller, you couldn't, it was a nightmare because we didn't ask. Sorry to mention BT, but there you go.
that. That's okay.
They got better since. I had the great joy, with someone in recovery, invited me to hear Pia and Pat Melody. Pia has since passed.
Mm,
Um, I'm not sure about Pat. She was not married to him at the point where she did pass. They were doing a book tour on her two seminal books, Facing Codependence, Facing Love Addiction, in the early 90s in a hotel in London. And again, I had one of those thoughts that just arrives in my mind. And I'm going to swear. The thought was, when the shit hits the fan, that's where I'll go. And as luck would have it, as destiny would have it, as higher power would have it, the day I decided, I rang the person who was kind of the Cerberus at the gates of hell to get into recovery. And she told me that Pat Melody was in London. And by 3 o'clock that afternoon, I was having coffee with him.
wow.
In those days, um, if you were coming from this country, the Meadows understood, well, most places in America understood that, if we had insurance, it wouldn't work in America. And so they would do a deal. And
Mm,
Pat said to me, I will do you a deal. If you ever tell anybody what it cost you, I'll charge you the difference. I can't even remember what it cost me. But I actually, unbelievably, I did haggle with him, and I've never done that on my behalf before because my dad had died, as you know. I'd had the big operation, which actually
Yeah,
I ended up having to pay for. It was my ninth in 12 years, so it was huge. Clearly, my last at that point. And I said to Pat, I can't pay more than it costs for my mother to have care for a year. And he agreed. It was extraordinary. It was heaven sent. So I went. And I frequently refer there. They do have a contact here in London, Max Cohen. Um, it's and I then worked in a rehab here in the UK and one a daycare in London, and they were as good as they could be, but they didn't under it's a while ago. They didn't really understand all the neurological impact, the science behind it. I mean, the scientists have now caught up with good old Dr. Bill and Bill W. They now understand why AA works because it's about connection, it's about
yeah,
community. You don't need to go and ask how many alcoholics have had a drink since. You find out what work. In fact, going back to your question, what is the solution? God knows. We have examined the topography of the problem up the wazoo, but we know that the problems are really complex.
yeah,
And solutions are, in the Zen art of simplicity,
yeah,
phenomenally simple. Keep
very,
showing up, change your thoughts,
yeah,
feel better, even if it takes you half an hour to talk yourself into feeling better or to call a friend.
mm,
Just it's so simple.
yeah.
Not
And
easy, but simple.
because it's simple, as we always talk about, sometimes we miss it, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah. Well, we try too hard.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like that looking for the path, looking for the answer. Well, again, we say in recovery, if you don't know what to do, do nothing.
yeah,
If you're not sure, okay. It's not, I mean, to me, after all these years, addiction simplistically is an illness of feelings and appetites. And I'll keep it in the eye, for my inability to handle my feelings, have my feelings, extrapolate the ones I liked, annihilate the ones I didn't, rearrange, for my inability to do all of that, I would feed or starve an appetite. And that might be substances, it would certainly behaviors in my case, it would be all sorts of bits and pieces. And by coming out of the feeding and starving the appetites and becoming aware of my feelings and understanding that there is no way around them, over them, or under them. The only way is through them. And
mm,
I believe that we're all born with what I call the hole in the soul, that internal sense of oh, nothing, if you like, or the void,
yeah.
whatever language one cares to use. And unless and until, the bigger the hole, the bigger the soul, unless and until we're prepared to go in, or I was prepared to go in and sit there, throw a party in it, redecorate it, examine it, have a look at it. Is it the whole by my design? Whose design is it if it's not mine?
Mm,
Then there is no solution.
yeah, I
And
love that.
after 20 years of being profoundly single, I then got myself into a relationship and I'm in it now for 4 years. It is extraordinary. It's entirely undramatic. The feelings are very big, but they're very quiet, which is not a combination I'm used to. Um,
I love
I,
that.
I can, I've learned, and it's interesting because he's not the solution to anything of mine, other than it is wonderful to live with someone. Um, I didn't know that. I've done it years and years and years ago. And of course, I picked, bless him, the sickest puppy I could find. And what that did was stop me doing any work on myself, because boy, was there a rescue mission at hand.
Yeah,
And the only person now I can ever rescue, if I'm in the drama triangle, I am my own perpetrator. I am my own victim, and I am the only person who can rescue myself. It is
yeah,
not a work that I ever outsource anymore.
yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that. I mean, that's a good place to end it, Adriana. I'm very mindful of the time.
Thank you.
Um, wow. I just wanted to say though, but for 20 years of being with oneself, you can't help but really get to know who you are and like that person if you're doing the work. And
Yes.
I know for sure you're doing the work. So
I quite like myself, not always, but I never hate myself anymore. I never call myself terrible things in my head if I've dropped or spilt something or walked into something or hurt myself. I wouldn't talk to anybody like that. So why would I talk to myself that way? I
exactly.
know whose voices those were. Actually, mostly teachers, but I know whose voices those were, and they're gone. What I can do, Dave, which is probably the most profound thing, is I can trust myself, knowing that my higher power will stop me or caution me or pull me up short somehow, somehow.
Yeah.
And that is great, big, huge. I don't have to, I mean, as a result of some of my big T traumas, I was late coming back from a lovely dinner on Saturday night in the West End, and I get a taxi. I have to be able to work to afford that because I don't do public transport on my own at night. I never have in any
Mm,
city from
mm,
stuff that happened in my 20s. I just don't do it. So
mm.
I'm mindful in the real dictionary definition of the word of how to take care of myself.
Yeah. That sounds amazing. It's a beautiful thing, and I feel like that's something for us all to strive for.
Yes. It's
So
worth it because I'm the only person I do have to live with. So I
exactly,
better know my roommate. They better be good with the rent. They better be good with the self-care. I better know who they are.
exactly that.
Oh,
Can't say
thank
fairer
you.
than that.
Thank you.
Thank you so, so much. We could keep going for another hour, but obviously we can't.
Well,
And
maybe we'll do it again. Maybe we'll do it again another time. See how this one goes.
absolutely. But I just want to say again, thank you so much, Adriana,
My pleasure,
for
Dave. My
joining me.
absolute pleasure. Take good care.
And you, all the best.
You too. You
Bye
too.
bye. Bye bye.